Bob, are you the one who has to hit that since you're the owner?
I hit it. It's recording.
Great. Yeah. So right. So really, what we did then was we kind of looked at, we used Google Analytics data at the time. We used Omniture, and we try to get the log files, and we try to crunch it, and then we'd also get DFP feeds. Even before then, we used to work with Yahoo's APT data, which was also not as nice. But our challenge was, and in the paywall system as well, that was the biggest challenge, was to kind of incorporate the paywall data, the ad data, and the user engagement data all in one place, to where you could analyze, okay, what's on the margin? Does it make sense to wall off this content behind the paywall, or does it make sense to target this user with a paywall, not another user, based on the math of, are they more valuable as just a free user generating ad revenue, or are they more valuable as a subscriber based on their propensity to buy? So those are kind of questions we were trying to answer, and it was just really difficult with the kind of data that we had. So that's really how Listener came about. So Listener, the way it works is it's very similar to Google or Omniture on the web tracking. So we have standard JavaScript tags for browser traffic. We have SDKs for iOS and Android native apps. And that data looks pretty similar to what you'd find in Omniture. Same grain and level of granularity. The two things that we built that is really kind of the unique things are the integrations with ad servers. So we have direct integration with DFP used in their Create a Wrapper, and that lets us see essentially every single impression that is loaded on the page for every user. And also the revenue for each of those ad positions. So we know, let's say Bob loaded the homepage on DallasNews.com, for example, and he saw 4 ad positions. We would actually know specifically the line items that were served up to Bob and the CPMs of those line items. So as Bob continues to consume articles and view videos, we're kind of collecting the cumulative ad revenue across those pages on each page, and that gives us really a wealth of data about his engagement, his propensity to buy, his ad value, and that's really analytics that we do on a per user basis, is deciding who's more valuable where. And the last integration that we do is with paywall systems. So we have out of the box integration with MG2 and Piano and Synchronex, MPP, and that lets us really capture a lot of great data from that paywall system, including when the light box shows up or pops up, when the user clicks, the offers page, when they select an offer, and as they check out, kind of move through that checkout funnel, we capture all the events. So we kind of know who converted, who didn't convert, and if they abandoned their cart along the way. So that's really the Listener data. And again, what's unique about it too is once a customer has logged in, let's say if they're an existing subscriber or if they're a registered user, if they log in, we can also associate that ID and their engagement data back to any offline data or databases. So again, if you have Prism clusters attached to an address or an account number, we can then associate that to their engagement online. So that's probably the first two things here on the left, the ingestion and Listener. And then with that, I'll go into more detail here shortly about the kind of the data analysis and reporting. But really the key, besides the data and analysis, is the kind of last bottom right integration. So we kind of talk a lot about the data capture and the data flowing into Listener, but what we do is we actually send data back out of Listener into your fulfillment systems, as we call them. So primarily for the kind of digital audience, that's usually paywall. So we can actually push a segment or an audience type or a propensity score per user into your paywall system, so Piano or MG2 or whatever. We can push that same audience segments into DFP or DMP like Crux or Lotame, or even like a retargeting tool like Simplify. And then you can also have that same segment pushed into an email system where we have their email address. So it really gives you kind of this ability to not just see the data and reports, but also actually execute on the campaigns. And that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of our sort of ongoing support. Is once we kind of crunch the numbers on a regular basis in real time, in some cases, we'd be making recommendations to emails, paywalls, and ad servers. So I'll pause there. I know that's kind of a lot to digest in maybe 5 minutes, but any questions so far on any of that, or just the process?
Don't think so.
All right. So on the audience side, we talked about kind of the integration or the recommendations. So we're really trying to impact 3 primary things on the audience side. You're either going to grow engagement in some form, meaning the audience is going to come to the site more often, they're going to click more newsletters, they're going to read more page views. You're going to convert that audience. So essentially at the right point, you want to convert them from an anonymous or a non-paid user into a paid subscriber. And then you also want to, for your existing customers, really improve your retention or kind of retain those customers. And so as an example here, for engagement, usually we kind of customize the paywall messaging and paywall rules based on our segmentation and models to, either let's say if Bob and I visit your site, let's say Bob is a high propensity buyer and he likes sports content. So perhaps for him, the rule might be on the second page, let's give Bob, let's cut him off from reading more content. And let's give him a message with a $1 offer, and let's make a kind of a sports sort of themed offer and kind of reinforcing the value of your sports coverage. Let's say I've come to the site, but I'm a low propensity buyer. So for me, perhaps the message, you're not going to message me until the 5th article. And at that point, you're going to give me maybe a newsletter offer and say, hey, sign up for a newsletter, come back soon, et cetera, et cetera. So you're really kind of nurturing my engagement because I'm not ready to buy yet, but you're trying to cut Bob off sooner than later to force the issue and capitalize on his conversion propensity. So that's really how we would, again, in engagement and acquisition, tactics, adjust the paywall or even the email marketing campaigns to target users based on their profile. And then the retention, it's kind of a similar thing. It's kind of the opposite, but it's let's say if all of a sudden Bob gets acquired as a customer, he's really engaged. All of a sudden we notice that his engagement dips from twice a week to only once a week. So that deviation in behavior perhaps could trigger some kind of retention email or a survey or just our value statement thanking him for being a subscriber. So just a way to kind of use all that data to improve all of these things incrementally and really grow that paid subscriber base. The fourth thing here, advertising. I won't go too deep into this unless you'd like me to, but there is sort of some peripheral benefits there. So once you kind of have these segments and audiences that we've defined, and especially on the known user side, you can actually create advertising campaigns for these groups as well. And most often where that comes into play is like with first party data. So if Bob's a subscriber and he's engaged, and you know a lot about Bob, his maybe his income, age, where he lives, what his content preferences are, that can also all help in kind of targeting ads to him from your local advertisers. And it's a way to really use that first party data for high yielding campaigns. So yeah, kind of basically went through this here. So that's the example. So again, based on audience, the propensities, what we think is the best outcome, we would send into the paywall system, the email system, or the ad server a segment that would trigger the right kind of targeting for that user. Let's skip some of this stuff here. Come back to that. So let me pause there again. So any questions on just the approach before I get into some of the case studies and ways that we've seen publishers apply the data?
No.
All right. So this is actually the real segments for a market that we work with. These are not all of them, but these are the kind of the main 3 that we kind of analyzed and created some ideas for. So as you probably expect, a large chunk of your audience are flybys. So usually it's as many as 3/4 or even 80% of users are disengaged. And then really the top maybe 10-13% are kind of engaged enough where you can actually do something with them. And that's where this dynamic process really comes into play, where in my example with Bob, he might be a fanatic. So he might get kind of the more aggressive paid offers. He might already be a known user if he's registered for a newsletter. So you're really targeting them those fanatics with very kind of aggressive paid kind of offer tactics. Then the kind of the middle group here, the stable users, you kind of want to nurture them first. And perhaps the goal there is not to convert them to a paid user or paid subscriber, but rather, get them to sign up for a newsletter, get them to register on the site, or engage in some way to kind of build that habit and loyalty. So this would be kind of the segments, or an example of the segments we would build for you all as a part of this analysis, and then we would implement it depending on how what you'd like to do. And we have recommendations of kind of things that we like to do and things that seem to work, but we'd obviously customize the campaigns and the way we apply this. And this is kind of more of the same. So just kind of splitting out the tactics based on the engagement levels. And then if they're a known user, again, you can use the email channel a lot more, and that seems to have a much better conversion rate than just using online, promotions. And if they're anonymous, you're really hitting them through the paywall and maybe the ad server. So that's kind of the general approach that we take. Some of the things that we've seen that are pretty universal, maybe not too surprising, desktop devices, people who use desktop convert better than people on mobile. People who come to the site directly convert better than those coming from, Twitter or Google or Facebook. That said, within sort of those search and social channels, Google is usually the best one. Facebook is probably the worst in terms of converting audiences to paid subscribers. Obviously, local audiences are going to convert better than non-local. And then the variation that we see across markets and sites is really the content sometimes. So, in one site, it's really local crime and kind of county city coverage. Other sites, it's sports is the primary driver. So it really depends, I think, on each of your sites. You'd probably see some variation, or perhaps certain content might fare better than others. But that's kind of what would be teased out of the analysis and the modeling. I'm going to skip some of these. This is just the conversion funnels, but just kind of showing the data behind some of those conclusions. Here we're just comparing the conversion rate on the left here versus the total visitors. So 0.04% of the 3.4 desktop users convert, compared to 0.01% of the 5 or 6 million mobile users here. And then as a percentage of modals, which is the kind of people who are prompted to pay with a Lightbox or a modal, it's a pretty similar trend. About 0.34% of that 400,000 converted, and on the mobile side, about 0.15% of the 450,000 that were prompted. And then similar funnels for Facebook and Google. So you can see, and the direct channel here is, let me get my highlighter here. So the direct channel, does pretty well, but then Facebook is one of the worst, and then Google is maybe twice or more as good as Facebook. And then we do this by segments. So I showed you the fanatics earlier and the stable users and flybys. So you can see that the local fanatics, if I can do this right, enthusiasts and stable users are really the ones that are driving conversions. What's interesting is that some of the non-local ones are subscribing as well. But you can see, again, there's a clear correlation between engagement levels and conversion rates. Again, the flybys aren't really doing too much. So what that lets us build over time, we usually launch with those segments, but what it helps us build over time is really a propensity model. And as we learn more about your market and your audience and who converts, who doesn't, what are the unique, is it really desktop is the primary driver? Is it really content? Is it unique days on site? Is it something else? So as we kind of learn about, as the model learns what works and doesn't work, we essentially build a propensity score for each user. And this is an example of a market where we ranked all their users, anonymous users, on a scale of 1 to 100. And the blue line here represents the probability of conversion. And you can see they're really at the top, maybe 12th, top 15th or top 10 percentile is really where you're seeing that inflection point. and in conversion rates. So in terms of the application, we would really say, for that top 10th percentile, that's where you're really going to try to, offer them paid products in the site, get the message out in front of them more frequently. But then everyone below that top 10 percentile, sort of on the, whoops, just did there. Sorry about that. There we go. Everyone kind of on this side of the distribution, we would basically let them consume a lot more free content and try to build loyalty first before trying to make them buy. So that's the modeling, and then what we can do as well is kind of forecast the expected returns. So in this thing, we're just showing the, this particular site, they started with a meter of 30. So the x-axis here is the meter count, or the page view count for the meter. And they wanted to know what would happen if they lowered their meter to 25 or 20 or 5. And you can see the trade-off. So they had a particularly low ad value for the most part. So you can see that they're basically, if they move the meter by 5 articles to 25, they'd get 80,000 in subscription revenue over 12 months, but they lose about just under 9,000 in ad revenue. So it's kind of a 1 for 10 trade-off here. But as you get closer to 10 or 5, you're going to get a lot more sub revenue, almost 300,000, 25,000. But you're going to risk 100,000 in ad revenue. So it's kind of a 1 for 3 or 3 for 1 trade-off in terms of the ad risk and subscriber revenue. So again, what we're doing behind the scenes, again, over time as we learn, is not just applying the propensity scores, but also applying the kind of risk reward of where to set that meter and for whom, and how aggressive should you be for each user based on this kind of math. So we did some tests on this. So we did confirm, this is an older test, probably should update this with some newer data, but this was a test we did on the email system of those propensity scores. And effectively we proved that the high propensity users convert 3x versus like a random sample. So that was kind of our conclusion. So the model works. I think we had another test in here. Yeah, here we go. So this is a similar test where we did a run of site campaign, just no targeting, and we did a Mather kind of high propensity test or segment. What was unique about this one was that the click-through rate was actually higher for the run of site, but overall the conversion rate was twice as high for the Mather group. So again, just the ways that the results of kind of testing some of these propensity scores and validating the model works. So let me pause there again. Any questions so far about just the audience application and kind of how we go about modeling, testing, and implementing?
So before he goes any further, I kind of wanted to get a sense of where you are in your process. What are the kinds of things that you're interested in executing, experiences you want to give to your engaged users, questions you want answered on your side, and maybe Arvid could speak specifically to some of those.
We haven't had paywalls before, so this is new to us. We're trying to figure out, we've had a fairly good programmatic revenue as a company, I think, compared to some of the other examples that we've seen that have put up the Berlin Wall. I think we've talked to a couple that have done super hard paywalls like Zero Stories, and it seemed like they had less at risk than we do from a programmatic standpoint. And so we're trying to figure out how to strike a balance there, maximizing our conversions for the subscriptions while maintaining as much as we can on the programmatic side. So, and then obviously building out our first party data is an important step in this too, so that we can use that from the ad standpoint too. So it's all brand new to us, and so it's interesting to see these case studies.
Yeah, it's I mean, the benefit you have in some ways of kind of getting into this in 2018 is you've had a lot of people kind of take that first leap, so I think there's been a lot of learnings that we've had and publishers have had where what works, what doesn't work out of the gate, and kind of what is that long-term, multi-year strategy. So you kind of have a lot of, you're not necessarily the first one cutting through the jungle. I will say, that the programmatic side is definitely important. So, part of what we do sometimes, before recommending anything is really a full study of actually assessing, what does your current revenue profile look like? How does your audience currently engaging? And what is that risk reward? Or give you kind of a couple scenarios to think about. Here's what would happen under a hard wall. And here's is it going to be net positive in the first year? Or are you going to break even at some point? Or here's a metered paywall solution. And at what meter do you break even? What meter do you make more sub revenue than ad risk? Or where is the ad risk minimized? And how can you mitigate that risk by adjusting some of the business rules of the paywall? Whether it's doing like first click free from Google or Facebook, set a meter higher on mobile devices, et cetera. So again, you can kind of almost have a pretty clear picture of what are the risks involved under varying paywall scenarios, and obviously the return as well. And that's really a great decision-making tool that that would, I think, give you some good balance or bookends to here's sort of here's where it's not profitable, here's where it's going to be likely profitable, here's where it's a slam dunk, and the decision is clear. So that is something that we sometimes do as kind of a pre-analysis that would be helpful, especially if you're new into this.
How does price factor into your propensity? Do you experiment? Are you experimenting with pricing?
We are indeed, and some of the A/B tests that we run, test different offers. I think as a general rule, the best practices we see. Let's see if I can something down here at the very end. But the best practices we see are, usually setting. I don't know if I have that in here, but really setting a intro price. So maybe like a 99 cents for the first month. That's probably, I think, a standard now in the industry, and seems to work pretty well. We don't really like free offers that much, like a free 2-week trial. We're not really keen on those. You might get your conversion numbers up in the short term, but you're not really getting a long, high value subscriber. And then in terms of the price point, I think that's something that we could tease out out of the data if we were to kind of look through some of your engagement metrics. The range that we see is probably in between like $10 and $20 a month. That's probably the wide range. There's probably still a few markets in the $7.99 range and $8.95 range, but that to me seems a little bit low for most markets. But again, it could depend on a lot of factors. So the short answer is I think price is definitely important, but that's something we could kind of make a recommendation on based on the audiences within each market and what we think their propensity to pay is, as well as the content that's the value of that content.
And we're a collection of papers, not one big paper. So we could potentially have strategies for the forum, which is our biggest paper, versus one of our smaller papers. Those strategies could be different.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one thing that you'll probably hear me say ad nauseum is sort of we're really against the one size fits all model. So I think, certainly simplifying as much as possible and not having so many business rules that you can't keep track of anything, but certainly, not picking a price because it looks nice on a piece of paper, but it's not really relevant to the market or the size of the market or newspaper that you're applying it to. So yeah, I think definitely there'd be a different strategy based on the size, the engagement, how much content you're putting out there, and how unique it is. Even that could be part of the formula. Is if there's a lot of AP content and kind of associated referral content, then perhaps not. But if there's a lot of unique content they're putting out, that's really where the value might be. We also see some best practices. I'll mention one more thing on kind of the value proposition to potential subscribers. Sometimes publishers will at the same time try to enhance kind of that value exchange. So instead of just kind of metering or cutting off the existing content, they might create like a custom or kind of a premium newsletter list. So like a curated list that would only be available if you register or if you're a subscriber. That's considered your best content. Sometimes apps, they choose, depending on what your ad potential and apps are, apps is that you could perhaps say that's only available to your subscribed users. So there's, again, it would probably vary depending on, to your point, to the market and kind of what your status quo is and where the opportunity is. But I think there's ways you can further enhance some of that value outside of just metering the existing content. So I think those are really great questions. I mean, I think, and they're the right questions to ask. I think, what we've seen historically too is a lot of, those first movers, they probably made more mistakes than they should have. And in some ways, it's good to have someone kind of be first to the door, but there's things that they did probably in hindsight that they would have done differently. So I think, I think you're asking the right questions, and I think it's just about trying to make sure that you have a full picture of the risk and reward under different scenarios. That would be kind of probably the decision-making point of how to proceed. And who knows, we might find, we actually did a project with a magazine recently, because they're also kind of just now really entering the paid content space. In some ways, newspapers are ahead of the curve of magazines in terms of digital subs. But we actually found in that market, it was very difficult for them to kind of be profitable in their first year, just because their CPMs were so high on the ad side. And they didn't have any programmatic ads, but they had a really strong direct kind of sold strategy with CPMs like in the 10 to 15 or higher range. So again, their risk was much higher than I've seen in like almost any newspaper. So the recommendation there was perhaps to tread lightly, but again, that would be something that we could tease out from looking at your data is, again, if you do have a valuable programmatic and direct, portfolio, how can we mitigate that risk? Or how can we make sure that you understand, or kind of where can you set your meter to where you're not risking more than like 5% of that revenue, and that the trade-off on the sub side is much greater than that. So that would be kind of the analysis we would do, is to really give you that full picture.
How does Listener run with the paywalls or with like a Lotame?
So Lotame, the way that we envision that working is, it could really perhaps supplement some of the analytics that we do behind the scenes, or it would perhaps add some more context to those Lotame segments. So Lotame, if you have a segment of, let's say, male age, how old are you, Bob? 40, 45, 40? So, yeah. So let's say you have a male age, 40 to 45. If that's a segment Lotame, what we could tease out is, what is their actual ad value, or what is their propensity to buy? So I think that's where Lotame comes in, is perhaps understanding where are your high value segments reading, or what are they reading, and what is their propensity to buy or not to buy. So you can use some of those segments to, I think, augment, some of the propensity scores that we'd be supplying. But that could certainly be part of the integration for sure.
I can ask just briefly, in your Listener tool, what kind of stuff can you pass so we can do offline matching? What are you available to pass? And you don't need to go into every detail, but kind of the rudimentary, what kind of key metrics does it capture so we can use that for matching in the offline world?
Sure, let me share one that I put together recently. So open. So this is, this might be kind of an eye chart. Let me get this a little bit larger. So Listener, so where we do have, so there's two ways that we capture, maybe three ways that we capture a known user. It's either through someone actually logging in. So these IDs are actually the login ID from subscribers or registered users. Here they're all print subs, coincidentally. We also get IDs sometimes from like a commenting engine. So if people have to register with like Gigya or like their social login, we can usually get an ID there. And then the third way is from newsletter campaigns. So typically what we recommend is in your newsletter or in your email platform, I assume you're using UTM codes or some of those UTM codes. So you can add one more code to that link or those URLs that are put into those newsletter emails that is actually dynamically inserting the user's ID from the email system. So if I click a link from the ajc.com that comes to my inbox, I am then tracked on the site with my email ID. And that's how we can reconcile kind of that full picture of engagement from your known users. So that's the method. And then the data that we really put together, it's pretty granular, but really we usually aggregate it to some level to where we have, you know, their email, if they're a subscriber, we have the account number. And then we have probably dozens of metrics and segments we can add. So like you remember the fanatics from before. So we would know which of the known users are fanatics. We know what their favorite section of content is. We know what their favorite device to use, their favorite author. Are they usually coming from local or non-local geographies? And then we have the secondary. So we have kind of primary, secondary preference. We have some scores here. So these guys are all in the top 2 percentiles of engagement across your audience. We're not to 90th percentile. We have change in engagement. So if they, you know, if they've moved up or down in engagement over time. Then we have kind of the raw data behind the scenes too. So how many cookies did they use over this time period? How many article pages did they read? Unique days on site, ad revenue, impressions that they saw, how many were direct versus programmatic revenue. Sorry, I'm kind of going pretty quickly here, but
and all of this information is available to you in various varieties of formats, and Tableau dashboard settings as well as data files.
Right. Yeah, this is your data. So we typically the way we pass this over is either FTP site, so we can give it to you in FTP site. To Bob's point, you can look at it in the dashboard. We usually try to get it into your email system or just your kind of fulfillment channels again. So if you're using like Salesforce or MailChimp or one of those platforms or any platform, we can usually automate a data feed with whatever columns are needed, and you have all this engagement data to launch any kind of campaigns you like. Yep. Any other questions on data or? Yeah, I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you quickly, so feel free to ask away.
What do you see for a churn rate? Do you have a average churn rate that you've seen with people who have converted to digital subscriptions?
Yeah, it's probably somewhere between 50 and 70%. That's kind of the range that we've seen, especially like in the first year, or if they're acquired on a huge discount. So that's about what we see. But again, like I said, if you take some of the tactics that we'd like to recommend to prevent churn, like one example is, you know, somewhere in here we have the engagement change. So usually what we do is when we load this list into an email system, there's a flag here, and sometimes it says something like disengage, 1 or disengage 2. So it's kind of how many standard deviations they disengage from their normal behavior. So what a lot of people do is they use this flag as like a trigger to send an email that says, we get some kind of like either a survey or a hey, how we're doing kind of email, just kind of way to help prevent that potential churn. So this is really kind of almost a real-time way to almost have like a canary in the coal mine kind of thing, where if someone's disengaging from their normal behavior, is that a warning flag that they might stop? So
it can be the messaging can be as specific as recommending content that they've the type of content that they've seen before, because that information's already available.
Oh yeah, you can get really creepy with it if you want. So you could say for disengage 1, you could say, so they're really into Keith Pompey, who's I guess a writer on the Philly site, and really into news and business. So you could say, hey, Bitcoin's going crazy. Keith Pompey's got it covered. Make sure you check out these articles. So that could be a way to kind of try to re-engage them. So, and that could also be inserted dynamically based on the data we send into the email system. So we have kind of an email template, and then based on some of these fields like primary section, primary author, secondary section, that could be kind of the triggers for some of the custom language that the email includes in its text.
And then A/B testing to validate whether the messaging is working versus some other messaging or lack of.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So we track everything. We have, we'll probably build tons of reports over time in Tableau as we, as you all launch campaigns, and we suggest, changes. So you'll kind of see one that we did recently. I'll share that was kind of cool. Was testing. Let me see if I can log back in here. So apologies while I struggle with my login, but we did a test of different kind of pop-ups for a newsletter campaign. So on the site, we actually tested what's called I think they call it a whisper or slider. So it's kind of a very soft, sort of unobtrusive little pop-up on the bottom of the screen that says sign up for a newsletter. The other one was like a very aggressive light box that it kind of hid the article, and it was very in your face. So what we found was there wasn't really a lot of variation in signups by content, but what we saw was, here we go, so that the slider here on the bottom was converting. I mean, that's 0.14 versus the block converting at 0.5%. So it's almost a no-brainer to say, okay, the slider, maybe it's, you could argue user experience might be nicer, but in terms of success and conversion, the block wins every time. It's almost 4 or 5 times the conversion rate in volume. So that's just one of the tests that we did. We have similar tests, by price, and again, we'd kind of recommend, where to start and kind of what to test with you all as well. I guess what I don't want to have happen is that I know we're throwing a lot of stuff at you, so it's not, this is all on day one. It's sort of, you kind of walk before you fly type of approach.
Where do they get that data from? They suck my data.
I know we got some more time. We probably have to run in probably 10, 15 minutes or so, but anything else or any other pain points or things that are sort of
So usually at this point, we will have folks ask us about how does an engagement start, what's the ramp up time. You've got IT folks in there, they're going to probably want to know about the tagging process. Is there anything we can take you down those paths?
I guess we're all just assuming it's code that's going to run on our pages out of our content system and either utilize the tags we agree on or that are already in the system.
You're dead right. Yep. So if you have a data layer in place already, or if you have kind of a CMS in place, we would just piggyback off of that already. And if you already configured like Omniture or Google to kind of integrate those tags into, then we could just do the same exact integration. That's one. I mentioned a creative wrapper into DFP, so that's the other one. And then depending on the paywall vendor you choose, we would work with them to kind of close the loop there. Yeah, I mean, to Bob's point, in terms of ramp up time, I mean, it's really, we usually need about 45 days of data to really kind of get the segments built and the initial recommendations. So from kind of, working backwards, it's probably about 1 or 2 weeks really to get the tags installed, and that's kind of just working, on and off. Usually, a couple calls with our lead developer and whoever that was that I think just asked the question. You kind of probably work closely together to make sure everything's configured and validated. And then over about 1 or 2 weeks, we have, kind of the all clear. And then from there, it's 45 days of data collection where we're kind of building out all the stuff that I just showed you. Some dashboards. And then from there, we make a recommendation of here's what we want to test first, or here's what we think you ought to do next. And from there, it's really, within 60 to 90 days from that initial tagging is where you're really starting to see the testing get into place.
One of the things that we do that's usually pretty successful with new clients onboarding is we kind of go through the process with them. We take them through what are the things they want to achieve, what are their priorities, what kinds of campaigns would they like designed, so that we're not at a point where they have everything sitting in front of them and now they're trying to figure out what to do. So we can, at that point, we can start to share what others are doing, how they're approaching challenges, and we can prioritize the different the rollout strategy that you want, and so that Arvid and his team know what to build, how to build it, and begin developing the rules behind that, so that the time frame stays relevant for you.
Can I ask you a question about the paywall? You mentioned Piano. We looked at MG2. Both of those products have something similar to what you provide. They have may not be as in-depth, I'm not really sure on it, but they have something similar. So I was wondering if you could tell me how you differentiate between yourself and those add-on products that the paywalls companies have.
Sure. So we work with both of them. We kind of think of ourselves, as I'm sure Bob said to the group before, but we're kind of like Switzerland in that regard, where we really want to work with everybody. MG2, SynchronX, Piano, etc. In terms of technology, I want to say they're pretty similar. I mean, they do kind of similar things. At the end of the day, they're really popping up a light box, or they're setting up the checkout flow. So in terms of that regard, I don't see a huge difference necessarily in the technology. You could argue that perhaps Composer, Piano's tools, has a really nice UI, like for the end users to set up campaigns and experiences. My experience, I'll say this, I have seen that MG2 is a little bit more, I think, flexible in terms of customization. Not to say that Piano can be flexible, but I think they're I think more rigid with some of their timelines or their kind of production schedules. So it's a little bit harder to kind of squeeze in like a little custom thing at the last minute. So I mean, that's perhaps one aspect. In terms of executing the recommendations that we're talking about here, I wouldn't really say that there's a clear winner. We've had maybe a quicker response from MG2 and kind of a quicker willingness to kind of get this kind of case studies launched. And I'll say one more thing, that because of the customer management, Piano is sometimes difficult to get the data out of. So when you convert a digital-only subscriber through Piano system, they live within the Piano system, and it's difficult to price them the way you want to. It's difficult to email them directly. Now, again, a lot of the work that we do kind of on the back end is actually pulling the customers out of Piano system and then trying to put them back into like a Salesforce or a marketing engine where you can kind of communicate to them the way you want to. But even still, it's kind of limiting in terms of what to do with their prices on renewal and testing. So I think in MG2, their G2 database, again, it's pretty flexible. I think it's more closely integrated with like NewsCycle and that whole family. So I just say that, again, there's obviously it's not a clear winner to me, but again, there's just some things between MG2 lately has been, I think, more eager to work on these case studies with us and be a partner, and the data management is perhaps not as siloed as the Piano. I can't speak to cost. It's usually pretty different depending on who they're selling. But like I said, we work with everybody, so we won't be, we'll be just as eager to kind of move forward either way. So that shouldn't really impact the success of what we're proposing here.
So we're approaching top of the hour. Just wanted to kind of throw it out there for last questions. I know Arvid's going to have to wrap up here pretty soon, head to the airport. But I definitely want to make sure we've shown you everything you want to see. We've answered questions for you. And believe me, this is not one of those things where once we've answered the question, we're never going to answer it again. With every engagement, we're right there with you. We're answering questions. We're talking strategy. We're sharing best practices or things that clients are doing. Arvid is, he's highly involved with our U.S. and international clients, and the best idea is a stolen idea, to be perfectly honest with you. So, would you like him to show you a few of the Tableau dashboards so you can see how you view this data? Is that something you just want to take a look at later as we talk further?
Well, I guess, can I ask one more question? Sorry to jump in, but in your propensity modeling for subscribing and things like that, we kind of, we do business with you as well on the print side in our pricing with that. I'm imagining we could feed in first-party data back into your identity stuff and then use that to better refine the customer segments. Is that something we could do? We actually found we do that. We started doing that with the print data stuff. Or could we also do that in this instance to help refine the model?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of goes both ways. So to your point, if we know, especially if they're a known user, we can associate any data. If you have it at the email level, we can usually, like I said, if it's Prism data or like Axiom, or if it's just like newsletters, contests, or that they participated in, or if they're like a former customer in your database, so all that we can incorporate. And then to your point on the print side, print projects we're working on, this same data, as you can see in this example, we could use this as part of that pricing decision, or even churn modeling or lifetime value. So what we find is, like, as you probably expect, print customers who are really engaged online tend to be less price sensitive. So you can actually price them more aggressively on renewal. And vice versa, if you see someone who's not engaged online, that might influence our pricing model to tell us that let's be less aggressive on that renewal price and not risk churn. So it really goes both ways, and absolutely on the connecting those dots.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Bob, I think that's it for the questions.
Great. Well, then we'll give you back a few minutes of your time. And Steve, Matt, you guys want to regroup at some point and talk about next steps? Please just let me know.
Okay, Bob, I'll let you know, and if there's any follow-up questions, I'll get those out to you as well.
And if you could send us the recording, that'd be great.
I'll definitely send that out.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.